Real Dads Lead.
And welcome to another episode of Real Dads Lead. I'm Dwayne Smith, your host, and next to me is my buddy Matt Hamilton. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good.
Always good?
Yeah, always good. I'm just
from a
laughing.
spirit
You're always so energetic.
That comes
with
from a
those.
spirit of joy, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's like a calm and collected joy.
Yeah. Do you get stressed at all?
Of course.
But you know.
I just try to
who's in
remind
charge.
I just try to remind myself that this is all for my sanctification and trusting the Lord with it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Good learning about it. So, anything happened over the week or weekend that you anything special?
Man, I feel like there was, but I just can't remember.
It was a regular.
Pretty much, yeah. We've had. I think I mentioned them in the past. We have some French kids that have been in our youth group for a little while, and the one has been here all school year, and we've grown really close to them.
Yeah.
And they're leaving tomorrow, so
Okay.
there's quite a bit of sadness. And they spent the night at our house one more time on Monday night, I think it was, with my boys. So just trying to hang out with them. And the one is. We've had a lot of conversations together, and the Lord's really been working in his heart. And he just really loves the Lord and wants to follow him. He's become faithful to share the gospel with others, and he's just increasingly thinking biblically. And he's excited to take this back to France because when he came, he wasn't as mature in his faith. So got high hopes for him. Going to maintain some discipleship stuff via WhatsApp with he and his brother. So actually, the stuff that my boys and I are going through as far as transitioning from becoming boy to man, books that we're reading, different resources, etc., they're going to join in on that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, French boys, huh? You got parlez-vous français?
Negative.
Yeah. We had a graduation, and it was kind of a pop-up graduation. Kyle called and said, "Hey, I'm going to," because he finished his master's. He's finishing his master's degree. And sometimes, a lot of it was online. It was online. So it's like you don't really have to go through the ceremony part. But he was in Cincinnati, and he decided he wanted to, I guess, the last minute. And said, "Hey, I'm going to graduate tomorrow." So
the night before. That's crazy.
Can you want to come? I'm like, So that morning we drove to Cincinnati, and my parents, who are, they live in Colorado, but they've been just visiting the
East Coast or
this side of town, this side of the country. My dad's from Virginia, and they still have a what they call a home place that my grandparents lived in. All their brothers and sisters own it, but it just sits there empty. So they stayed there for like a month. And then they're in Kentucky right now with my mom's side of the family for a few weeks. And they'll be here for a few weeks before they head back to Colorado.
So they were able to make the graduation.
So they were just like an hour and 15 minutes away. So
nice. Closer than you.
They came. Yeah. So they came to the graduation too, which was fun. Yeah. It's interesting because they're VRBO in their house in Colorado Springs. And so that's been a interesting thing. Listen to them get ready for their VRBO, and first time ever doing it.
Good for them.
Seems like they're raking in the money. It's like while you're gone, they're gone for 2 months. So why would it just sit there empty and do nothing instead of making?
They have an amazing view, don't they?
Yeah.
Can I see a picture like of the mountains across the lake or something?
Yeah. If you look out their kitchen window, it's actually the Pikes Peak.
Okay.
You see Pikes Peak out there.
It's incredible.
Window. But I mean, they live in like a regular neighborhood like we do, so it's not like a cabin or anything like that. But people who were just visiting or do whatever. I guess one of their clients was a wedding. They were having a wedding. They live in Colorado Springs, but everybody was coming. They needed some extra space, so they just rented out.
Nice.
So I thought that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's great.
At any rate, let's get back onto the subject matter about dads and lads.
That's right. Stepping up. Chapter 10.
Stepping Up, A Call to Courageous Manhood by Dennis Rainey. I don't know if I ever told you that we got permission to use their book. Did I tell you that?
You asked. Oh, you. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I asked for permission and
From Dennis or from the publisher?
from Dennis. Well, I don't know who
wrote
whatever the website is.
Okay.
And the first part they were like, "Well, exactly what are you using it for?" And I had to answer some more questions. So I answered. It was legal. Their legal team.
Okay.
And I answered to some more questions, and then they came back and said, "Yeah, you have permission.
Great.
But we also have the right to revoke anything that if we feel your content is."
So are they going to listen to the content?
I sent them a link.
That'd be pretty nice.
I don't know if we got any extra subscribers from them or not, but
that's sweet.
At any rate, a call to courageous manhood. So we're on chapter 10, understanding the landscape. I like this chapter.
Yeah,
actually.
me too.
And it was pretty. I don't know about convicting, but just like understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
me a lot of
spot on.
Yeah, very spot on.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was the first quote?
The quote is from none other than Mark Twain. Always has some interesting things to say. Sometimes controversial things to say.
What was his real name?
Shoot.
I can't remember either. All my English people out there
probably
kick me in the butt.
I can't remember either. Here's what he has to say. He says, when a boy turns 13, put him in a barrel and nail the lid on the top. Feed him through the knothole. When he turns 16, put a plug in the knothole.
Yeah, I understand. There's some. The nice thing, it says understanding the landscape as the title. It's pretty. I mean, it's pretty easy to go back to your own teenage years and understand what they're going through when you remember that stuff. So the very beginning, it talks about how Dennis says that his mom called him an idiot boy.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, looking back, I was an idiot boy. And he went through some
of his ventures.
His adventures and different things that he did that was pretty stupid. And
very stupid.
I
was shocked, actually.
Did you have any of those stupid things? Did you do anything?
I
personally, before I got my license, I took my parents' car out for joyrides.
Really?
Yeah.
Look at you, Dwayne. I never would have thought it.
Yeah, me neither. But it wasn't a joyride because I would just ride around in my neighborhood, but I would take the car. I know my mom listens to this podcast. She probably never knew that I did this.
Oh boy.
When I was, 14, 15 years old, I take the car. I would just drive it around the neighborhood. And
then she was shocked at 16 when you found out how well you could drive.
I was like, man, this kid's good.
It's a natural.
So, yeah, Dennis talks about how he's thankful for mercy and grace and God's provision and watching out for him because a lot of times he could have, killed himself.
Yeah, right. Or a friend.
Yeah.
And the time where they took the pure sodium from the science lab and dropped that into a river beneath the bridge and thankful that it didn't explode right away because it was so massive of an explosion that the bridge itself shook.
Yeah.
Crazy. I mean, on the one hand, I'm like, wow, that's genius.
Yeah.
Like, I like these guys.
Yeah.
They're adventurous and they're clever. Like, there's a lot of good qualities there to praise.
Right.
But the execution was, it was idiocy. Like you said, it was just a stupid mistake.
Right.
And he was thankful, that the Lord was there to protect him. I think the one that shocked me the most was he said that he took a swing at his mom.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that's crazy. I can't. He said, thankfully he missed. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, that kind of, it speaks to the dads out there whose sons can be a bit out of control sometimes, that there's hope, I mean, especially when Christ comes into the picture.
Right.
Dennis became a great man of God, a great husband, a great father. He's now impacting other fathers and husbands globally. There's hope for your son. And I think that's important to hear because sometimes when your sons are out of control, you can just feel, you feel the lack of control, and it's a scary thing. Yeah. And you can start worrying about their future and you don't know what to do in this particular situation. Of course, you got to discipline. But I guess the main message is don't lose hope.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I do think that the idea of, I mean, because in a previous chapter, he was talking about how good and respected his dad was,
Mm-hmm.
right, and how good of a father he was. You know, so to hear that he took a swing at his mom, it
Mm-hmm.
does not portray that my dad was lacking, or you know that the influence of my dad
Mm.
wasn't there or anything like that. He still had that, but
Mm-hmm.
to the point in this chapter is just talks about the changes that you go through in your body, and
Yeah.
there's brain activity that's different, brain
Mm-hmm.
chemicals, body chemicals, hormones, all that kind of stuff that
Mm-hmm.
it's just hard to control. So
Yeah.
I do think that there is there's no excuse, but there is excuses.
Yeah. And the way that your children act, sometimes it does reflect on your parenting for
Yeah.
sure. You know, I mean, there's just some times where parents just are not disciplining, and you can see that in the kids. But there's other times where parents are disciplining, but like Proverbs says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, you know, and they need to be trained out of that. And sometimes it takes time, and sometimes it takes longer for some kids than others. So anyway, yeah, I mean, his dad may have been a great dad, but Dennis just had some things that he needed to work through on a personal level, and he did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a very engaging opening.
Yeah,
for sure.
I did besides a joyride when I was on I took the school bus to school and back, and there's one, and outside of they would call it they called it a middle school, but it was like 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And one of those years, they might have been 5th grade, where there was a big walnut trees outside, and you know those big like green, what do you call them? Whatever, those green palms that come out off of the walnut trees.
Palms, no.
Like there's looks like a big tennis ball.
Okay.
You've seen them? Never seen them?
Off the walnut trees?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen green walnuts, you know, like this big. Is that what you're talking about? You're talking about the ones that look like brains?
Yeah, they look like brains.
Yeah. I don't know what they're called. We call them monkey brains.
You call them monkey brains?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So they would just fall down onto the ground, and we would pick them up and then we toss them at each other, like just throw them at each other. But they're hard.
Oh yeah,
you know, they hurt when you hit. They hit. But we just gathered a bunch and put them on the bus. Took them on the bus with us, and then while we're driving down the road,
throw them at cars.
Man. And then my eyes got real big. I saw a big U-Haul truck, and then I threw it at that U-Haul truck. Bam! And you know, everyone on the bus was like, "Yeah!" It's like
you're the school hero, yeah.
School hero. And then that U-Haul, whatever the driver was upset. Chased the bus down.
Wow.
Pulled us over, like honking, and then the bus stopped. He got off, got onto the bus, started screaming at who threw that. You could have killed us, and
wow,
super mad. And at that time, you know, no one was saying anything. Everyone knew it was me, but I had confessed myself.
Yeah, and good for you.
Said I did it. My bus driver, I think his name is Mr. Bruce, but he wouldn't let him go any further onto the bus to come and get me or anything. He said he'll take care of it. And he protected me, but I learned my lesson.
Wow.
I got written up at school. Probably got spanked again. Got spanked at home. Probably. That's the way it went back then.
Yeah. Wow, that's exciting.
But I was an idiot boy too. I was like my 6th grade maybe. So
I mean, to be fair, I would definitely say every kid has a degree of idiot in him.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just the way that we are. It's the sin nature, you know, whatever. And
I think it's just a lack of thinking. You don't think through consequences.
And experience. Yeah.
You don't think through consequences.
Right.
So it's just
there's no foresight.
Yeah, no foresight whatsoever.
It's like what's happening right now.
Yeah.
that's as far as I care to look.
And it's like innocent. Nobody's going to get hurt by this.
Or so you think.
So you think, you know,
right? It's not like you're not malevolent. You're not trying to hurt this person. Yeah, it's true.
And
It's good to keep in mind when we're parenting, you know, because sometimes, I mean, when we see our child do something, we're immediately thinking of what the consequences could have been,
right.
and we're judging them based on the idea that they also knew what the consequences would have been, and yet they still chose to do it. But that's not what happened. They just didn't think through it.
Yeah. Let's take a break, and then we'll go on to the next section.
All right, sounds good.
All right, next section. What is it called?
Raging hormones.
Raging hormones. Have you ever had raging hormones?
Yes. Yeah, man.
All right. Should we do
I think we should just go point by point here.
Should we do a warning?
Oh, yeah, probably. I mean, the warning is essentially we're going to be using some, as Dennis did, some words that are, you know,
we're going to be blunt.
They're sensual.
That's it. We're going to be
whatever.
Blunt.
Yeah, certain anatomy words. You know, I mean, I'm assuming mostly men are listening to this. Maybe some teenage boys, maybe some moms, but
yeah, my mom listens too.
Yeah, I'm sure she's heard all of these words before.
Yes.
So, okay. Yeah, so I actually want to read the first paragraph.
All right, go ahead.
He says, "You've been a boy and you've been a teenager. It's a confusing time, a time of raging hormones and emotional turmoil, a time of doubt, anger, and a maddening desire for independence, a time when you step back and forth between being a boy and being a man."
Nice.
Yeah, I just think that captures it so well. Like you've been a father of teenagers, 4 now. 4 teenage boys specifically. I've been a dad now for a few years of 2 teenage boys. And I just think that captures a lot of what I've seen. You know, the raging hormones, yes. The emotional turmoil, yes. You know, I think that sometimes for me, and really until I was a father of teenagers, I forgot how emotional I was as a teenager. I mean, I'm not like, you know, crying over everything kind of a thing, but just I remember having these conflicting feelings that sometimes overwhelmed me as a teenager.
Yeah.
You know, I think we kind of tend to push out the bad, kind of suppress it and move on with our lives. And it's admittedly, to my shame, sometimes difficult for me to deal in a godly way with the emotional up and down of my teenagers, you know, because I'm like, this is ridiculous, you know, like this is not important, you know, and you're acting like it's the end of the world kind of thing. I mean, you've completely lost it,
right.
You know, and that makes sense again, from my perspective, having now lived 20, almost 30 years, you know, past being a teenager. I have a lot more perspective on things. It's not fair for me to, you know, expect that perspective from them. So as you said, kind of entering back into their shoes, remembering what it was like to be a teenager is really key here if we're going to show them grace and compassion and be patient in our training of them.
Yeah, that's right. And I do think that a lot of the emotional stuff comes from the other stuff, the raging hormones and the desire to be independent. It seemed like that was mostly what I have had to deal with, is that desire for independence. You know, even with, you know, Scott, who's, you know, autistic, who's on the spectrum, and he wants that independence. I mean, if I'm trying to make him do something that he does not want to do, he wants to make his own decisions, you know, or, you know, if I'm trying to, you know, starting to do something, no, well, let me do it. I want to do it, you know, and he'd get super upset if some of that emotional turmoil comes from that. And I really noticed it with some of the other boys that the more independence they were seeking and the more I was holding back or making them do things that they wanted to make those decisions on their own, or they want to have a say in it, caused a lot of friction and just conflict in their hearts as well.
But Yeah, and I think something to say here is that desire for independence is not a cultural thing. It's a very natural thing.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, I mean, throughout history, no matter when a culture has considered someone to be an adult, you know, like today in American culture, we say it's 18. But you know, throughout history, it's often been like, no, you're going to be a functioning adult at the age of 13, 14, 15. No matter when society said you're going to be an adult, right around that time, people just naturally start desiring independence. And I think it's because our God-given design is just that. Like we're actually reaching adulthood in those mid-teenage years,
Yeah.
you know, and the way that our society is set up now, I think does cause some problems. You know, like society or societal expectations are conflicting with natural design.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you think that, I was just thinking, number one, do you know when was Mark Twain, what
I don't know.
was he?
Should I ask my friend Google?
You can ask Google.
I'm gonna ask him.
Was he like the 1920s, 30s?
I don't know. Oh, what was his name? It was Samuel something.
Samuel Clemens.
There it is. Yep, Samuel Clemens. All right. 1835 to 1910.
1910. Okay. 1835, 1910. So, because we were just talking about that teenage thing, like we're considering it 18 in the 1800s, in early 1900s, they consider it earlier, I'm assuming.
I'm not sure about law-wise, but I mean, what we can certainly say is pre-industrial revolution, kids were I mean, they were working with their dads on the farm even before they were 10.
Yeah.
And then they were acted to.
With Mark Twain's quote, they were still having those issues.
Oh, right. Yeah, because the hormones don't. I mean, no matter when you consider a teenager an adult, the hormones are still an issue, for sure, and they still need training.
Right. Yeah, and then biblically, like we're reading Proverbs or what have you, you are, I mean, basically, you're looking at those and you're like, okay, they're dealing with the same things that we deal with now.
Yeah, definitely.
Even 3,000-4,000 years ago.
That being said, he's going to talk about here later about having higher expectations for our youth is key in them living up to those expectations. You know, like becoming and acting like a functioning adult, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But because we have such low expectations in our culture, we don't, in a sense, pull them up, into maturity as early as we used to. That's at the root of a lot of the issues that we have today. I think I was telling you before the podcast, I'm reading Steve Farrer's book, Point Man, it's an older book, but I love it. It's fantastic. Steve Farrer is he was kind of a leading Christian teacher in, I think, the late 90s on what it means to be a good man. Fantastic stuff. I would definitely suggest it. But he points out that in Jewish culture, a boy was with his mom until the age of about 7, at which time, 7, I'm thinking of a 7-year-old. I mean, like that's so young, at which time he would then come under the father's direct supervision. He'd be out in the fields. He'd be taking care of the home. He'd be doing all of those things at the age of 7, so that by the time 7 years later at the Jewish bar mitzvah, 14 or so, he is pronounced a man. He's going to be treated like a man. He's going to be functioning like a man. Like now we're moving towards marriage, all this other kind of stuff. I mean, we've left all that behind, in American culture. And even in American culture, it was like that pre-industrial revolution. Kids were working with their dads on the farms. And they matured as far as responsibility goes, etc., much earlier than we do. And our society almost says that that's bad. Like you need to let them be kids.
Yeah.
I think that's backwards. And I think that we see that because by the time our kids reach that 13, 14-year-old, like they want this sense of purpose and like,
Yeah.
I have the know-how and then I can do these things.
Yeah.
But the reality is because we've let them be kids so long, they don't know how,
Yeah.
they don't know what to do. They don't know what's true. They don't have responsibility. So I think that there's a lot of value in teaching our kids a lot younger.
Yeah.
I just want to throw this out. I don't know if I did in the podcast before, and I just think that it's crazy. John Adams, I was reading this somewhere, I can't remember. Oh, it's in a book called Becoming a King. It's also another book on manhood. Can't remember the author right now, but he's with the John Eldredge Ministries. But he notes that John Adams, one of our first presidents and founding fathers,
John Quincy or John?
I can't remember.
One of them.
Yeah. So
probably the son.
Before he became president, obviously, he was a co-diplomat with another man to Russia at the age of 14. 14 years old. Yeah. How many 14-year-olds do you know out there who are mature enough, not just in their intellectual knowledge about politics, and civics, whatever, but just in their own person and character, like I don't know any.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because they're not capable. I think it's because of how we raise them today.
Yeah. That's interesting. Because I do know that like the other, like in biblical times, they'll talk about kings that were, they're teenagers, or
Josiah was
king at 9 or something like that. And, I mean, they had advisors and all that kind of stuff with them, but that was a little bit different because you're not voted into that necessarily. But yeah, you have to weigh that in. I did want to ask you if you thought there's any kind of, the more we do the science part and how much you put into that, the psychology, because they'll talk about the brains aren't fully developed at a certain age
until like 25 typically. Yeah.
So why would we want to expect some kind of this adult maturity when their brains aren't even fully
I think the simple answer is if you start expecting it at 25 when they're fully developed,
but do you think
you're going to be highly disappointed.
Thing,
no, I don't know if I'm understanding your question. I think it's definitely scientific that our brains our bodies are kind of in an adolescent or growing, changing period, if you will, up until the age of 25. That's as far as I can tell, a scientific thing. But we start expecting of our children mature living before they reach the age of 25, so that by the time they're 25 and they can marry and have jobs, etc., they're actually prepared to do those things. You know what I'm saying? We say, well, they're not developing, so we don't expect much of them. And then when they are fully developed, they can do nothing, or they're not as valuable to family, to society, to the church, because we expected so little of them before, and then we criticize them. You see what I'm saying?
I do. I'm just curious if is it silly to expect certain things,
such as what? Maybe more specific.
I mean, just maturity things, what you're talking about. We want to expect them to have, let's say they're working, you want them to have a good work ethic, but okay, we're going to expect you to work as long as the same hours as, fully functioning adult male when you are, 11 years old.
Yeah. I mean, again,
you're not really ready for that.
Well, they're not today, but what if, like in older cultures, your kids were starting to work with you and had these responsibilities around the house when they're 7, 8 years old. By the time they're 13, 14, 15, they can totally put in a full day. I mean, my teenagers can easily put in a full day of work. So I think that what I would say, maybe just in general, is I would say that our expectations, we should have a standard, and we should constantly be calling them up to that standard and holding them to that standard. But like Dennis says here, he says it's a time when you step back and forth between being a boy and being a man. It's not like it's not as easy as you're drawing a line in the sand and say, son, you've now crossed this line. I expect you to do these things perfectly from here on out. It's not that clean, So we set the standard high where it needs to be, and we're calling them up to it. We're continually calling them up to it, but we understand that occasionally, because this is a learning process, they're going to step back into boyhood. They're going to fail in some way. That's at that point you help them up and you bring them back across the line into manhood. That's how you prepare them to be men when it really counts.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, my boys are talking about being married at like 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
They're 17 and 16 right now. That's not that far away.
No, right.
So I'm thinking, I think we've talked about this in school. I learned all this academic stuff, the majority of which I've never used again in my life.
Yeah.
And I go to college, and again, it's a liberal arts college. I'm learning more stuff I'm never going to use in my life. But then I'm getting married at age 21, just 3 years after high school. And I'm like, well, yeah, what was that class on marriage?
Yeah.
I never took one, or parenting. Like I have no idea what I'm doing except for, of course, what you experience in the home, which for some people could be good. Some people could be bad. For everybody, it's incomplete, So I'm thinking as a father, I need to be preparing my boys to be men where it counts, as husbands, as fathers, etc., because that's not that far away for them right now. I think that we need to put a lot more emphasis on that in our homes today than we do.
Yeah. All right. Let's take a little break, then we'll get to point number 2. Okay.
We should just be very upfront about our situation here. This is our 3rd time recording this segment here.
Yes.
The first time we were like 13 minutes in and the computer decided to update.
Yeah.
And the second time we recorded for 24 solid minutes. Good material.
Very good. Excellent.
Took a break and we had about 7 minutes of it that the computer captured.
Yeah, really only 2 minutes because then it was like all staticky.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks for your patience. Well, you don't have any patience because to you it's going to be seamless.
Yeah.
All right. So we just finished the first introduction.
That's right.
And I thought it was section 1, but it wasn't even section 1.
Yeah.
And there's how many sections?
There are 6 parts to this section.
6 parts. This section, which is entitled, again, Raging Hormone.
Correct.
All right. So, first part.
All right. So, the first point is a teenage boy's body is changing in strange and foreign ways. This is where, if we want to issue a warning, there's going to be some words used, maybe that younger kids may not be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. If you haven't had some of these conversations yet, and you got little kids listening, you might want to put your earbuds on in.
Yeah, something like that.
All right.
Good. All right. So essentially he lists a few things like that they're going to start experiencing: erections, wet dreams, sudden waves, he says, of sexual desire and lust for certain girls that they're attracted to, things like that, that will be altogether new for them. Mm-hmm. And they can feel very much like, what's happening? Like, what am I supposed to do, with this situation? They can feel embarrassed about certain things. And so as a dad, kind of taking the initiative, as we said before, men need to take the initiative, having that conversation with your boys, ideally beforehand, but right around the time that these things take place, or shortly after they take place, and letting them know that these things are totally normal. They're not strange, right? And even laughing a bit about it. Like that's what we've done in our house. We've had a lot of funny conversations about these things, and it makes them feel not ostracized, but like they can come and, talk to me more, as different things happen. So
now, are those organic conversations, or how do they, or do you like initiate, okay, I'm going to talk to my boys about this, or do they generally come to you first? Or?
Yeah, there's been some times where I have definitely started the conversation, but there's probably more times where it's totally organic. They
Mhm.
just they come up and they'll like whisper and they'll like look around and they'll say something to me, and I start bursting out laughing,
Yeah,
about what they've
right.
said, and then they start laughing, and we just have a good conversation. But it's serious, but it's funny,
Yeah.
But it's lighthearted, essentially.
Yeah. Do you ever have conversations about like if you're watching something or seeing something, or do you find that person attractive? Or I mean, it's kind of in that same vein where it's like they're having these waves wash over them with certain girls, and generally I can pick that up,
Yeah,
like,
right.
because I'm not having the same wave, but I can still see someone as attractive or cute or whatever, and I can say, "Oh, do you find that person attractive?"
Yeah.
And why or why not? I have those conversations with the boys.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always necessary physical attractiveness too. That's a good time to have conversations of what else makes them attractive,
Yeah. No, we've had those conversations for sure. I think that's good. I think that it's good for them to start thinking now about what it is they should be looking for in a girl. And those kind of questions can lead to that.
Yeah. The big thing that can be harder to breach is some of the feelings that you might be experiencing, like your boys might be experiencing. And I think I told my boys, I told you in the other two podcasts,
other two
attempts at this podcast, that my first experience with as pleasure feelings in my groin area was with a lawnmower. And sometimes I'd be out there and mowing the grass, and the handle is next to my private parts, and that vibration would make me feel, oh, this feels good, and I would just stand there for a little while.
So it's like your first exposure to that feeling.
That
you're
feeling,
saying.
yeah. And they're going to go through the same thing. It may be something else, whether it's in the shower or if it's just rubbing on something in their bed or anything.
They will notice it.
They'll notice it.
Yeah.
And this whole thing is knowing the landscape and remembering the things that you went through, and maybe even sharing some of those experiences that you've had, that say, hey, this is natural, and this is how my first experience with those kind of feelings were. And in my case, how I didn't deal with it in the proper way, and it can take you down a wrong path. To be able to at least be open and honest with certain things like that. But this is something that it's good to have open conversations. I think. I think that's more or less the key point.
Right. Yeah. I think one of those places that need to be talked about is the wet dreams thing. I think my first exposure to that was, I think, in middle school health class, and they kind of caught me before it ever happened, kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, this is crazy, but it can be super embarrassing for a teenager, because it's kind of similar to wetting the bed. Like you wake up and like, I didn't think I was going to wake up like this. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
That's not something to be ashamed of. Like, that's, I think, God-given release, as your body is producing these things in prep for marriage. Right. That being said, a conversation could be had about the dreams that you've been having. Like, well, what is it that led to this? What were we thinking about? And, because it, depending on the state of your heart in general, that's kind of how your dreams will follow. But the dreams are kind of otherwise not really what I want. You're out of control, but what did you do with your thoughts afterwards? And the reason that conversation is important is because if your child does not deal with those thoughts correctly, it will lead to things like masturbation or pornography, right? Like they are not going to do the right thing with it.
Right.
So it's extremely important that we have those conversations as dads.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. What's the next point?
Next one is, he's bombarded with bewildering images, thoughts, and choices about sex immorality. Yeah.
So that's at all ages. I can't remember when this book was written, but it doesn't matter the time. No matter what, biblical times, they're bombarded now. I think it's more than ever now.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But the idea that it's been happening throughout time
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to be bombarded with
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, and the Bible says to avoid those things,
Mm-hmm.
flee from those things, but they're everywhere now. It's very difficult because it's everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And this, it has to do with not just temptations. Like in the last point, we didn't talk about it, but he mentions, as you're walking through the mall and you see like a Victoria's Secret, store or something like that, your kids may feel these feelings that they never had before. They certainly will at some point. We live in a very sexualized society, and you just, like you said, it's very difficult to get away from it.
Yeah.
But to complicate matters today, you've got all this conversation about a multiplicity of genders and acceptable sexual practices, right? They are bombarded with those things, whether it's in their school or it's on social media. And I think this is something worth camping out on, because I know for a fact, actually, because I've had conversations with other dads, that there are many dads out there that just are clueless as to what is happening in our society, just how sexually perverse it's become. And that's a scary thing, because as we've said before, I mean, your kid's life is kind of a vacuum. If you don't talk to them about these things, like what is acceptable as far as sex goes between one man and one woman who are married, the culture is going to, and really the demonic activity behind the culture is going to fill that void. So dads need to be up on what's taking place, on the evolution of sexual things in our culture.
How would you suggest they do that without getting involved in them themselves?
Yeah, I think that I think finding solid, trustworthy Instagrammers or whatever it might be that you can just go to without getting involved in the school and coming up against all kinds of other worldly things. If you could go right to them as they kind of keep you up to date on what's taking place around the country, that's for me one of the most helpful paths to take to that. Yeah.
Do you share, do your kids share stuff with you?
They do. Definitely. Yeah. They know, because of conversations we've had early on, that those things are unacceptable. So when they come across them, they already have this kind of passion against them, and they'll share with their mom and I.
Yeah. And do they share also good stuff? Like, oh, this is like mom or dad will like this.
Funny stuff.
Necessarily funny, but just whether or not it's political or something that you're into, and they know that you would be into. I mean, because I think you can shape them that way a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And you can kind of share different things. I know that we have a couple Instagram family groups. Some is just the twins and I, some's the whole family. Some they have an anime chat with Chad and Luke and Kyle and I, and it'll just be if they find something that would interest that group or whatever, that's what they would post. But Luke a lot of times would post something that's inspirational or something that he saw that a spiritual encouragement or something like that you can share. So there's things that you can do, but also if they're sharing other stuff that is, at least with my kids, I'll share stuff that is questionable maybe, but they're not afraid to share it. That's another aspect that can lead to communication, I think, as well.
Yeah.
That openness, which we keep coming back to.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to point out one more thing about this point. Just the fact that dads, especially if your kids are not homeschooled, like if you are in a public school or even a Christian school, your kids are going to be exposed to sexual ideas, sexual jokes, even encouragement to experiment sexually. And that may come as a surprise to you. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you have some kind of an idea, but I'm willing to bet for many dads, you don't really grasp the situation I've told you, I told you in our last attempt at this podcast that I was at the pool, the public pool last year, and just the few times that I went, I was around kids from 10 to 15 years old in different situations, and they were having sexually explicit conversations. I mean, like super gross
10 to 15?
stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Like there was one time a group of 10-year-old boys were in the pool next to my daughter and I, and the stuff they were talking about, I was like, and it wasn't heterosexual conversation either. I mean, it was totally disgusting.
Yeah.
I had to move away, or a 15-year-old girl talking about pornography that she was viewing. And I mean, but it was just like, it was totally normal, for them to have these conversations.
It was an organic conversation. They weren't awkward or anything.
Yeah, right. And it's increasingly the case. And so you need to know that your kids will be exposed to those things.
Again, going back to the idea of knowing the landscape and remembering. So I went to public school. So I do remember those kind of conversations. And even just being on the bus at, 4th, 5th, 6th grade and doing things like posting signs on the bus with sexually explicit things, like so other drivers could see them and see what their reactions are, type thing. So, and at that point, I really didn't even know what I was talking about.
Right. Yeah.
But going back and looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, what was I doing? So,
yeah. Right. But to your point, I do think that it's worse today because back then it was typically, male, female sexual jokes. Yeah. But now it's not, and it's not even just male, female, female. It's any array, of different things that they're exposed to. And, you may think, well, my kids will never participate in those kinds of things. But even if they don't participate them, and you should be aware that they're encouraged to experiment to find out what they prefer. But even if they never do, there's another side of this. Yeah, I've talked to older Gen Zers who grew up during this kind of modern sexual revolution, and they have become so desensitized to the idea that there's so many genders, and these are Christian young people, or that there's so many different acceptable ways of having sex. It's not that they think that they're acceptable, but they don't. There's not this intuition. There's not as strong of an intuition in them that is wrong. That it's bad, that we need to protect our culture from those things. Yeah. They're less likely to vote against those things, for example, right? So there's this slippery slope that's taking place in our culture, and your kids, if you're not careful, will be a part of that slippery slope. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right. It's almost like not engaging, so it's not necessarily acceptance, but it's like let them be them.
Right, yeah.
I will believe this way. Let them believe their way.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things when it actually does.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if that's how your children end up thinking, how are their children going to think? Right. And so as a dad, putting that link in the legacy chain there of this is biblical morality. This is what biblical ethics look like. And instilling those solid values in your kids so that they are then equipped to do the same for their own.
Right.
So next one, he faces relentless, unbelievable peer pressure, essentially to do dumb things to fit in.
Yeah. This is, I've done that. I just talked about a little bit before how my junior year was one of my worst years of my life as far as doing stupid stuff, living up to what Dennis said, idiot boy. I was an idiot boy. And in that year, I was caught cheating on assignment, was failed for a quarter. I was caught shoplifting, and I was spanked.
In school and at home.
My junior year. This is my junior year in high school. I was spanked.
Wow,
they wouldn't do
crazy.
that now, but that's how old I am. They'd spank me then.
Man.
And then Yeah, I got suspended for 3 days for misbehaving on a trip. All those things happened my junior year. Little things, and I didn't think that they were big deals. But my motivation was acceptance. My motivation was being the class clown type
Yeah.
idea and being looked at as cool or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
And they were small. That was the motivation. They were small things, but they had big consequences. And I think that's the way Satan works. Thinking that they're small things and you're not thinking of the consequences whatsoever. So
yeah, teenagers and kids just in general, and unfortunately even some adults don't think through the consequences. It's just like, what do I want to do now? What would be funny right now?
Yeah.
So yeah, keeping that in mind as a parent, that you also didn't think through the consequences. This is a journey, and you, through your mistakes, unfortunately, you begin to realize, oh, there's consequences to my actions. Like there's inevitably always a chain reaction. What's the chain reaction going to be?
Right.
It's just part of growing up. But to stay on this point a little bit more, I think having a conversation with your kids early on, like really early, this isn't like the sex talk. You can have this conversation very early on for your kids, that you are made for community. Like this is part of your God design. Like we've talked about this before. God is community. He's made us in his image. We're designed for community. And naturally your kids are going to look for it. So kind of casting a vision for them early on of what good community looks like, good friends versus bad company, so that they have some goal, right? They know what they're looking for in a group of friends and what they want to stay away from. We had those conversations early on with our kids, and I don't know if I've ever had problems with any of their friend choices. And I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but it's preventing. It's preventative. I think it's really going to be helpful. I understand the desire to look for community. You should look for community.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what good community looks like. And if you don't have that conversation, they will find bad company.
Yeah.
And that bad company will corrupt.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that you guys do very well is whatever their community that they find, whether it is good or bad, you don't know, but you engaged in that yourself. As a dad, you invite their friends over to do stuff, and you have their girlfriends over to do stuff. So you are actively engaged. And if your kids are quote unquote embarrassed or wouldn't want you to be with certain friends that they have, or they think you might not like their certain friends, then that should be a warning sign, like a flag, like, okay, maybe you shouldn't be hanging around this person if they are not, if it's not someone that you want us to, really know and get to know well, then it's probably not a good person for you to be around.
Yeah. And there have been times, like, especially as my boys entered the workplace, where they come into contact with certain other employees that they think are cool and want to hang out with at first. And through their stories, we start having conversations like, I don't think he's a good guy, that kind of thing. And there's a little bit of pushback at first, but they've always in the end realized that it was correct. And they've moved on from that situation. Yeah. So it's not been entirely without its bumps.
Yeah, right.
But they've been more easy to work through because of the foundation, right? Shoot, I was going to say something else about that, but just as far as investing in the kids' friends and girlfriends, I just had a conversation about this the other day. Both of my boys have girlfriends. I'm thinking, these are potential future wives for my boys, future daughter-in-laws for us, future mothers to my grandchildren, right? I want to have them into my home because if they end up marrying my boys, they will be a part of the legacy that goes forth from this family for generations to come. Right. And so I want to have them into our home, and I want to invest in them like I'm investing in my own kids as much as possible. So that's really the reasoning behind that.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that as much as possible, we have a good relationship with them so that if they ever do enter the family, that they are like daughters to us.
Yeah, I like that.
So, All right, the next is he battles an emotional upheaval of anger, sometimes even rage, at whom or at what he doesn't know. He's just angry. And again, I think that this is very insightful just because it's so true experientially. I've seen this in some of my own kids, as well as in youth ministry. Kids just get angry and they don't know why. They'll tell you if you ask them, they just don't know. There's just this overwhelming feeling that they can't, pin down what the reason is behind it. They just feel that way. And so remembering again, the emotions as a teenager for you, they were all over the place too. You had your highs and you had your lows, and they're just, it's not excusable, right? Like I'm not saying, when you treat your mom badly because you're feeling this and you don't even know what you're feeling, it's not acceptable.
Right.
In my case, I'm still going to give them a consequence for that. And we're going to have a conversation about how I understand that it's hard to control your emotions as a teenager. I've been there. Nevertheless, becoming an adult is beginning to learn what it looks like to lead your emotions instead of letting your emotions lead you. Because truth be told, even many of us adults at times, we experience that still. We're like, I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know why I'm moody right now, but I just am. It doesn't excuse my bad behavior. I need to take control of that and still love and respect the people around me, for example.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I just, what do you think about there's a difference between that hormonal, that chemical thing in their head that's causing this, and then the Holy Spirit working in them. The idea of the fruit of the Spirit is patience and forbearance and all this. It's like, is that evidence that's not in you, or is that something that
you mean if you're being patient and kind and loving?
No, if you're being angry and it's a chemical thing, or if it is in fact more than just, if it's a hormonal, if it's a physical thing rather than a spiritual. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, you're saying, are they spiritually responsible for that since it's a chemical reaction kind of thing?
Responsibility. It's just the idea of sometimes we want to solve a physical problem spiritually.
Oh, I see.
You know what I'm saying? It's you're quelching the Holy Spirit because you're not being patient and forbearance, and but it could be this is just what you're going through. It's a natural thing.
I think there's all kinds of natural things that we experience that we have to learn to bring into submission to Christ. Not let them control us. Again, like sexual desire. It's a natural thing for us to have sexual desire. It's also a natural thing, which in and of itself is not wrong, obviously, but it's also a natural thing for us to begin lusting after people, right? That doesn't mean it's acceptable, right? Natural doesn't mean acceptable. It just means natural. And in a fallen world, natural can be unacceptable. And it can be something that you have to learn to submit to Christ. And so as you experience these natural things that everybody's experiencing, you're being tempted in ways that everybody's being tempted to lose control and let your emotions lead you instead of the other way around. You repent. This is a conversation you have with your kids and something you should be doing on a regular basis yourself, but you repent of that and you yield to the Spirit. And in time, you're asking him, like you're feeling this rise up and you're saying, Lord, please help me to be patient, in this situation. And you begin to grow in that way. And those fruits of the Spirit, as you yield to him, become more manifested in your life.
I like that. We only have a few more minutes. So
all right, let's do it. We got two more real quick here. So he feels a strong gravitational pull toward independence to spin out of the family orbit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I think all boys feel that that need that independence. I think girls are doing it now even more. I don't know if it's the feminist movement or whatever, but they're feeling that. But I think it's really natural for the boys. And even my son, who, like I said, I think I said it earlier in the podcast, even my son, Scott, does that has that feeling of, I need to do this on my own, and likes to do it on his own.
Yeah. I think again, there's something natural. I can't remember now at this point if we talked about this in the recorded part or if we talked about it in the failed recording parts. Like, we're getting tired here now. But there's something natural about wanting to become independent. And for a boy, I think, again, it goes back to this nature of boys were meant to be, in a way, self-sufficient, because they're created to protect and to provide, for their families, and they're created to be leaders, right? Well, if they're still in your home and they can't really do all those things, yet they're not the leader, and they may not be able to express it, but they like to work. They want that feeling of accomplishment. If they can't protect, they don't have anything to protect and anything to provide. They kind of feel aimless, right? And there's frustration that starts to take place. So again, understanding that and learning to incrementally give them more freedoms. Where it's safe, let them make mistakes. We talked about this in a previous podcast, and then work with them through those mistakes. But that's a difficult period, not just for the teenager, for the parent as well, because you're afraid to give too much freedom too soon. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Let's hit this last one. We got 30 seconds.
He struggles with doubt and anguish and faces relentless pressure to deal with expectations. I'm just going to read the whole thing here because it's good. Pressures to excel in academics, make the starting team in sports, study for SATs, earn money, please his parents, impress his friends or girlfriends, etc.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can elaborate that on another podcast. We need to close this one out.
All right. We'll definitely come back to that one.
We'll definitely come back with it. So thank you guys for joining us. If you have any things you want to add, please pick them in the comments. Otherwise, real dads lead.